The Purdue Boilermakers run in the Big Ten tournament ends in the quarterfinals against the Michigan Wolverines. We'll be talking about this loss here tonight, and then, of course, looking ahead to March Madness starting next week and exactly the road Purdue is going to have to take, figure out who they're going to be here in the next 9 days or so, 8 days or so. We'll figure it out all now on the Boilers in the Stands post-game show starting right now. Welcome back to the Boilers in the Stands post-game show. I am your host, Kraig Braggs Jr. Alongside me, as always, is Joe Jackson, who just got back from Gamebridge as the Purdue Boilermakers fall to the Michigan Wolverines as the Wolverines were in control for the majority of this game, especially in the second half, as there was a bunch of defensive breakdowns and everything in between. Craig Bowers will be joining here shortly. He was able to get on the road a little quicker, and so he should be at his house where he'll be able to join this post-game show here in a little bit. But, Joe, you were there. You watched it all unfold. Obviously, last night they were able to dig through, scrap their way into a ugly, dirty win against USC where it wasn't the prettiest basketball, but they got the job done. But tonight, the Michigan Wolverines, a team that they've played now 3 times this year, even though Purdue started out, the game 6-0, Michigan went on a 12-0 run, and they really didn't look behind after that. And Purdue was just kind of chasing, it felt like, the entire game.
Yeah, I think it comes down to really 2 things. One, you're not going to win games when Braden, TKR, and Fletch combined to go 14 of 48. Just not going to happen. 2, nobody could stay in front of the ball defensively. And you're living in rotations. You're not forcing turnovers. Those 2, I truly think that just summarizes the issue today. And we will obviously dive deeper into all of it, but that's the thing. You're got good shots consistently pretty much the entire night. You didn't turn the ball over. You just missed them. And it happens. It happens from time to time. I guess rather now than in a week. This is still a team that I think at their peak can go on a run, but they got a lot of soul searching to do within this next week and trying to just get refreshed. Right. They are a team that I think is going to be pretty matchup dependent going into March Madness. Now, with that said, they still have the capability of going on a run. Just got to find it within the next week. Maybe, hopefully we're looking back in a month or whatever and be like, hey, not a bad thing that Purdue lost this game, get a little bit extra rest, but obviously in the moment, not great. Energy wasn't there for most of the game again. Defense couldn't stay in front, and that's just how it's going to be. Muted.
There we go. Right way to start the show with a little mute jar to add to the thing. So appreciate everybody here hanging out. Please hit that like button while you're hanging here on a late night. I know it's already 12:22 on the East Coast, Eastern time zone. It's 11:22 here in Central time zone. So got a little bit ahead of you guys, but ultimately for me to watch, Purdue kind of just try to play a 2-man game for 40 minutes. Miles Colvin, when he gets in, man, he really flashes. It seems like every game, but there's just so many points throughout the game, and it feels like for the entirety of the game where Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Wren are trying to play a pick-and-roll 2-man game, and the other 3 guys are just kind of standing in islands. And I get Michigan was filtering that defensively and kind of forcing that issue by design, and Michigan has the personnel to match up with Trey Kaufman-Wren, to match up with Braden Smith. So I understand the X's and O's standpoint of it, but it's just such stagnant basketball. It's either Braden or TKR, and once it gets into TKR, everybody just kind of stands there and waits for Trey to go to work. And when he's cooking like he was last night for 30 points, it can be effective. But when you got a guy like Golden who can match up well with him, you saw him at one point kind of stalemate him straight up, and then go to the other end and get an and one himself. When you got a big body like that, that's good in the post, he's going to pose a threat to a guy like Trey Kaufman-Renn. And ultimately, when you talked about efficiency, I mean, I think Braden Smith was 8 of 18 on the night.
5 of 18.
And 5 of 18, I should say. Thank you. And then Trey Kaufman-Renn, while he had 24 points, it was on 24 shots.
Yeah, spot on.
Right? So 24 attempts for him, 18 for Braden. The efficiency was not there for either guy, and they've been known to be efficient throughout the year. And I get we always talk about, offense isn't their problem, it's defense, and we'll certainly get into the defensive lapses. I mean, Michigan's getting wherever they want on the court. They get to the middle of the paint, they spray out and knock down a three. But this has kind of been my concern personally throughout the year, and I'm certainly not taking any pleasure in feeling like some of my concerns are starting to be realized. But this isn't just depending on Braden and Trey too much and they're carrying too much of a load. This isn't fatigue just from playing last night's game. I think you're seeing fatigue from throughout the season for both these guys and the amount of responsibilities they have to this team and how much this team leans so heavily on them to be the scorers and be the guys that light the spark. And I know Painter after the game in the post-game press conference talked about, they're just not an energy team, but they have been at times. But we're all the way so deep into this year, the Big Ten just turns into a rock fight night in and night out. I see a couple guys in Trey Kaufman-Renn and Braden Smith that look fatigued from the season, not just from the last couple games.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to that. I don't know. Purdue does a good job of balancing with, lowering possessions and things like that. Like, see, and David Jenkins says too much dribbling, poor spacing. Purdue got good looks the whole night. They got good looks the entire night. Like, and that was the common theme in the post-game presser is like, they got good looks after good looks after good looks. They don't need much space. They can, both TKR and Braden Smith can kind of operate in a phone booth at times. Like, they got to their spots, they got open looks, and they didn't fall. Probably some fatigue from the season. There's some frustration, right? Once a couple don't start falling. I know TKR, he mentioned how bad he wanted this game, and when shots aren't starting to fall, I think it can kind of snowball from there. You're also not getting as much Lawyer going 0 for 6 is also a big part of that too, where he's generally the release valve of guys that, hey, we can knock down a shot. Obviously he had, I think that's probably his worst offensive game of the entire season. It just kind of all goes hand in hand. Can I talk about that comment that you just brought up?
I'm sorry, which one was it?
It's from John Odom. Says, I love this team, but they will struggle to get past the first round. The roster isn't good enough. I am not going to come on here and say Purdue is a lock to get past the first round. So that I want to preface that is not what I'm saying. So I think it is fair to have legit concerns. I also do think statements like that are probably a bit of an over exaggeration if we're going to be able to step back and look at this team. They have TKR who, if we're looking at first round specifically, again, there are teams that can give them issues. Don't get me wrong. They are not going to just walk into the second round. But when you have TKR, that gives you such a baseline. And then you also have Braden Smith. That's the best pick and roll duo in the country. I think it gives you such a baseline that this is not a team that's going to guaranteed lose in the first round. Defensively, they're better than they were 3 years ago, that Ivy Travion team. That team made the Sweet 16. Now they lost to St. Peter's, but that team still made the Sweet 16. So again, fair, very, very fair to have concerns. Very fair to have concerns. But I do think that just kind of writing the season off already, to at least for me, is kind of an over exaggeration, just because the talent is still there. You're just kind of hoping, hey, they get a week of rest now and they can kind of bounce back. And right, if they can make it to the Sweet 16 at that point, it's
a success.
Just got to win your game.
Right. If they can get to the second weekend, I think most Boiler fans will then chalk this season up as a success. I mean, Scott White, was in the chat earlier, and he says, this season has just about evened out to what I expected for the first year without Edie. Started out way hotter than expected with lots of promise, but chilled way down at the tail end of the season. And I honestly think there was more of an ebb and flow to that, because in November, I think we were all kind of safeguarding our expectations because they were losing to the legitimate teams. They had some nice wins. They beat Alabama at home, but they started to lose some non-conference games. They hadn't lost non-conference games in like 4 years. And we're like, okay, this is who this team is, and it's going to take them a minute to find themselves. Then January starts, and we talked about this as we started the 2025 calendar year, this run of games where they could take advantage. Well, they didn't just take advantage. They took full advantage and went on a run all the way to catapulting themselves around the Super Bowl time, where they are number one in the Big Ten. I think they were like 11-1 or something like that. And they're number one in the Big Ten. And Braden Smith is going for your Big Ten Player of the Year, and they're the best team in the conference. And now you start to readjust what your expectations are because you're just so close to the end of the year. And now they lost. After that, they lose 4 in a row, and there was some real humbling there. And they've tried to pick up the pieces as the season ends. I mean, now you lose here in the Big Ten tournament. You lost the final game of the season to Illinois, and each one of these losses tonight, they didn't blow a 10-point lead. That's how most of these, games have gone this year, where that they've lost here in the second half of the season, where they're up 10 at halftime or they're up 10 in the second half and they blow it. Tonight, Michigan just straight up handled them and outmatched them on both ends of the court. But what since they've been on the 4-game losing streak, what's their record been, Joe? If you can do the quick math.
3-2 since that 4-game skid.
No, I mean just overall, and including the 4.
3-7. No, 3-6.
3-6 since they were number one in the Big Ten, and since then now they've fallen to 3-6. So now you have the fan base that's frustrated, and now it feels like this season is a disappointment. Where at one point they were extremely exceeding expectations, but to fall to 3-6, to go from number one in the Big Ten to now you're 6th in the Big Ten. You go to the Big Ten tournament, you barely beat USC in a very ugly game, and then you get waxed in a lot of ways by Michigan here tonight, and where it just doesn't feel like they even ever could have had a shot because they were just simply outmatched. And so now we're going into the March Madness tournament with very low expectations and very low energy and hype as a fan base because it just doesn't feel good. That being said, like you said, teams that got great shooters, if they just find a way to get hot and get going, I mean, you can play the spin zone, and I'm sure we will by the end of the show. I think we need to dive into a little more of the details of the game tonight. We don't have to go insanely detail specific of how they lost to Michigan. Michigan was the better team tonight, and that's the flat out truth. But there was some X's and O's things that I think Joe can get into about why they lost. But ultimately, I think there is a looking ahead to March Madness and the opportunity this team has to still finish on a strong note on a year where they've had a solid season, not a great season, but you can't say yet that it's a disappointing season. If they go on a first-round exit, yes, then it starts to be defined as a disappointing season. But we're not there yet. So let's see how they show up here in March. They'll get a week off, maybe 8 days if they end up playing on Friday instead of Thursday. We'll find out. As Kraig Bowers enters the fold, what are you looking at, Kraig? You always got faces.
It's Friday, bud. Your math's wrong.
What do you mean?
It'd be 7 days rest, not 8 days. But I get what he meant.
Oh, today is Friday.
It'd be like 7 and like a half day's rest, or something.
Yeah,
like
I guess so.
Yeah.
No, honestly, I thought it was Thursday. That's legitimately thought today was Thursday. My days have been off for a week since I had my surgery, so just bear with me because I think at one point I said 9 days rest earlier in the show. So
yeah, I was listening and I was like, that math ain't mathing, brother.
No, it isn't. I just I'm just that's where my headspace is at for the last week. So bear with me in that regard. I've never been good at math anyway. But Kraig Bowers here joining the show, got back to his humble abode safely after a tough loss as Michigan really put it to Purdue tonight. So I'll just get your instant reaction and your overall overhead view of everything that's going on right now with our Boilermakers.
Yeah, and I did get a chance to listen to you guys, so I don't want to rehash anything at this late hour. But thinking, I had a whole drive home, an hour and 10 minutes to think about this game and to think about the season in general. And Joe and I landed on the exact same two things in terms of what the issues were tonight. Just didn't hit shots on the offensive end. You got good looks, and then on the opposite side of it, couldn't contain the dribble. And then when Purdue can't contain the dribble, that forces help. Everybody has to rotate, and bad things happen. And I think big picture, right? We have to step back and look at how Painter builds his teams. We had Zach Edey. We had Isaac Haas. We had Matt Harms. We had AJ Hammonds. Like, we had Jawan Johnson. You keep going back on all of these guys. Painter's teams are predicated on having a rim protector. And on the outside, he's always gone after, at least, especially after they had that short period where they weren't very good and he started to rebuild this program. He did it by going after guys who have a lot of skill on the perimeter, but not necessarily a ton of athleticism, with a few exceptions, right? So we don't tend to necessarily have guys on the perimeter that are just locked down one-on-one defenders. But it's been able to work because we've always had this workhorse rim protector of a 7-footer behind there. And I am by no means going to say that Daniel Jacobson would have fixed all of this, but he certainly would have helped a lot of this. And obviously, Wilberg just didn't turn out to maybe be the guy they thought he might be. I think originally it was like, well, maybe, backup minutes, or maybe he can be a starter. But then it showed real quick Jacobson needed to be the guy. Jacobson goes down. Will wasn't necessarily that guy that was going to be able to come in and be able to play 20, 25 minutes and be that rim protector. So now you've got this perimeter that's built one way, right? Based on defensive principles and how Purdue wants to do things, with the expectation that normally we're going to have that rim protector back there. And it's just not there. So the one thing I would say about this game and looking forward is this team is who this team is at this point, right? So, like, I keep seeing these comments about we need this. Well, like, that's cool. We do. We can look at this team and say they needed these things, but this is who this team is right now, right? And they're going to have to make shots to win games. If you go back to that stretch you were talking about where we thought Purdue had some sort of defensive renaissance. The only team they played in that stretch, and like we hung our hats on the fact that, yeah, they didn't play top-level teams during that stretch, but they played Michigan, and they forced 22 turnovers against Michigan, and this is who we are defensively now. Well, it turns out it's not true. Like, that's not who we were defensively. And the fact that most of those teams were middle to bottom level teams in the Big Ten probably did help make that defensive renaissance look like it was real, because Michigan comes back and plays us twice and gets us both times, right? They figured it out. So this team's going to have to outscore people. Now, can they do better defensively than what they did tonight and what they've done in some other games? Sure. They can stick to their principles. There were some miscommunications. There were some bad rotation. There were some bad switches, whatever. They can be better. But at some point, we got to be like, all right, this is who the Boilers are. They're maybe going to have to put up 80 a game in the tournament if they're going to win. And if they're not making shots, then maybe just what it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you beat Oregon on that run early in the season on the road. I think at the time they were ranked like 9th in the country, so that was another game.
I forgot about that Oregon game. Yeah.
Well, and just from our standpoint as like just the average fan, I see, okay, you beat a top 10 team on the road in the country, new Big Ten team, right? And they handled them there and they were in their bag. Then you're right. You beat Michigan at home. You wax them, right? And welcome to the Big Ten moment for Dusty May. And Dusty May said, hey, I got something for you here these last couple games. Because ultimately, and Painters talked about this after they beat USC last night, this is a conference with 18 teams and a lot of really good coaches, right? And top to bottom, you got good coaches across the board. Eric Musselman, did everything he could last night and had a good game plan for Purdue. And now Dusty May for a couple games in a row. Painter can outcoach a guy like Dusty May or anybody in the Big Ten, but you got to have the pieces to be able to outcoach guys. And so, I see a lot of people pointing to like, Painter's offense or PJ Thompson's offense, if that's what you want to say right now. I've seen some fans saying that, it's not working. Well, to your guys' point, they got to knock down the open shots they have. You're only going to get so much from your interior. You can't depend on Trey Kaufman-Renn to drop 30 a night, especially when you're going up against a team that has, the kind of personnel that can match up with Trey Kaufman-Renn. There is times like early in the game where he just will force it into three dudes, and that doesn't help. You got to recognize, you got to be able to see that they're closing in on you and guys are going to be open, spray it to the outside. But by the time the game got away from them, there really wasn't anything to be mad about. Michigan was just the better team.
And that's the one thing, I guess, that I would say watching this game that I was disappointed in offensively because, they generated a lot of good looks. And it was almost like Trey wanted this one too bad because we've seen him in some games make the right read, make the right decision, kick it out. And Purdue, Joe and I were talking about this during the game. Michigan has a defense predicated not to give 3-point shots. So, like, if you're in the comments or you're on Twitter and you're like, well, why can't we get Culver more shots? Why can't we get Heidi more shots? Why can't we get Lawyer more shots from outside? A lot of that is what Michigan's trying to take away defensively, right? But the one time you had those looks is when you feed it into TKR, and as soon as he starts to make his move, then you've got like two. Well, I mean, the guy defending him and another guy, maybe another guy sometimes in there that we're all swarming him right when he went into his move, right? So you got to make that read then and kick it. Somebody's open, right? Either weak side or strong. It's like somebody's open. And I just didn't feel like Trey made those reads tonight. I didn't feel like he kicked him out. And those were where you could get Heidi more involved, where you could get CJ, Jakari, Fletch more involved in this game.
And the other suggestion I would make, and Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but when I watch Trey Kaufman-Renn and the way they try to defend him, and you get the ball to him in the post early, whether it's closer to the 3-point line or even if it's closer down into the block, like get into your motion faster, because what teams do with Trey is they stay away as he's getting going. And then as he's dribble, back down. Now it gets under 10 seconds in the shot clock, and teams then can close on him because your options are limited. You got to go up with the bat. Somebody's got to go up with the basketball, whether it's Trey or you're kicking it out and you're taking kind of a rush shot. So for me, Trey needs to get into his motion quicker to then make the defense collapse. And if he goes quick and he's able to get the bucket, cool. But if he goes quick and now they collapse, now you have the ability to make them chase the way Purdue was chasing, kick. And you have that amount of time to kind of get them on their heels and chasing around, chasing them around the perimeter. But it just feels like when you're trying to get Trey going, it takes the entire shot clock for him to find his way towards the hoop.
Part of it is just how the offense works, because they have some design sets that they've started going to even more, where basically they clear out the weak side and just flip it to him and let him go. But like if you're getting TKR into a traditional post up, you're generally going to have to enter the ball from the wing. And if that's going to happen, like you are entering from the strong side wing, you got to clear out. You got to let TKR have space to work. And so it's a tough balance, because TKR needs to get space and let guys move so that way he can go. But then at the same time, like you said, there are times he can get into trouble. And so now you're running out of shot clock. But unless he's like going right off the catch, which if he's doing that, that's more of like a predetermined read that, okay, I got my guy beat already. If he puts the ball on the floor and Lawyers or CJ Cox is 5 feet from him, like teams are just going to ignore it. And then they're going to swipe. And then that's also how you're getting turnovers that way too. So it's a balance.
It definitely is. I want to try to, it's late for you guys. It's 12:42 at night in East Coast time. And so I want to be respectful to you guys in that regard. And I know our loyal chat who's tuned in this late, we love you guys and
appreciate you guys.
We appreciate you guys. And that's why we continue to do these shows, no matter what time, no matter what the score was. And we're going to pick up the pieces. We only got so many more of these post-game shows before we're going to be waiting until November, and there will be a point in the summer. Exactly. 6 more. Thank you, Joe. But at the same time, you got to keep that perspective that, we'll be in the summer crying about how we can't wait for Boiler season to return. So let's enjoy it while our feet are here and be present in the moment. I do want to talk about a couple positives from the game that I I think I'm going to try to extrapolate moving forward. But I also want, from an X's and O's perspective, Joe, if you had anything that you really wanted to highlight on either side of the ball, whether it's defensively and the breakdowns Purdue's having or whatever, I want to put that spotlight first before we start trying to pull the positives from a game like this.
Yeah, I mean, I got stuff I can go to.
Yeah, if there's anything you had in particular, because I know you mentioned early in the show that you had a couple things, so I didn't want to take that from you. As then I want to transition to some of the positives I had, and then we can look forward to March Madness and what we think the seed will be and what we think the journey will be, and then we can close this show, try to close it a little quicker so everybody can get to bed at a reasonable hour.
I mean, it's March. We don't sleep in March, right? I think just defensively, right? Michigan had 25 assists, 6 turnovers. Like, the ball was moving, and Purdue defensively, it starts with just one not being able, like, just nobody could stay in front of the ball. And then when that happens, right? So say, or today, like, Michigan liked running this kind of empty corner pick and roll where there's nobody in this strong side corner. So now you're setting a screen here. And with Purdue, right, not being able to stay in front of the ball, sometimes they switch this. So now this happens, and now this guy's trailing, and you get this slip a little bit, and now you have, Lawyer or Braden or CJ on like a Danny Wolf right here. And so now you have to show backside help. And if that happens, again, now this guy, if we're going to move ahead here, it's going to be kind of something like this where, okay, now they're fronting, they're showing backside help, something like this ish. If this guy gets beat, that's also got to be help. And now that's got to be here. And so if they're getting into like this type of spot, it's a 2-on-1. And Painter has talked about, this is their cover 2 that they call it. And they want the pass going. Where do they? I'm forgetting if I'm getting this backwards or not, because he said it in one of the pressers. I think they want the ball going here and then here because it's just a longer pass, and so you're hoping you can recover. But it starts with not being able to stay in front. If this guy can't stay in front, it's just how it is, and you have to help then, right? Otherwise, it's going to be easy layups. So there's just things like that where it's just like, okay, Purdue isn't getting good defensive starts to the possession, and it's everybody. It's everybody right now. It's not just Braden and Fletch. It's everybody. And so, it makes it tougher. Just right. We've harped on it for the past month that Purdue is just a team that defensively they live in help. It's what they do. I asked Painter a bit about it today in the presser, and shout out Painter because he gave me another great answer. But I asked him, I was like, hey, you're really bad at defensive effective field goal percentage. Also, you're not forcing turnovers over the past month. Like, how important is it to get back to doing that? And he mentioned, like, I'm going to paraphrase him and take bits and pieces. One, like, got to stay in front. If you don't stay in front, it makes it a lot harder to do. And there's only so much you can do defensively from there schematically. Two, just getting back to getting your active hands. He's talked about them not really having super active hands. And active hands doesn't mean selling out and gambling for steals. It's being, if you're forcing baseline like they do and then they double, like getting your arms up, putting them in spots that makes it tougher for guys to make passes out of. Because if you can do that, and I think I'm rambling here a little bit now. I think that was something that really stood out to me on some of their closeouts defensively. And I don't know I don't think Michigan shot like superb from 3. 31%, but it felt like the ones that they hit where it's just guys closing out with their hands down, and it's like you can't close out with your hands down on Trey Donaldson. I don't care where he's shooting from. He has shown he will shoot from anywhere. Like, I know, right? You're gonna short close a little bit more because they don't quite have the foot speed, and you want to try to contain drives. Cool, but like there was just multiple times that it felt like hands weren't getting up and in spots, and it was just like those are the little things you can do to help your defense, and they need all the little things right now.
That's energy, right?
Yeah.
And that's what Painter said this team's missing at times throughout this season. You gotta have energy. You gotta, play with a purpose.
Yep, exactly.
So, the other question I have for you, Joe, is a couple times it happened, not many, but a handful of times when they're playing their post defense, and Will Berg got caught in it once. where they try to, most of the time they'll bracket where Wilberg is going to be between the guy he's defending. He lets him behind him, so he's in front trying to protect the pass, and there will be a guard behind him, underneath the hoop, like Braden or Fletcher, whoever, trying to, once the pass comes in, you strip the ball loose. But they got the big defending that way, but there's nobody behind. And so then they throw it in, and it was just an easy bucket. And Robbie called it a breakdown, but I'm like looking around at the court, like, where is the guy that normally is underneath? Like, how does that happen when that's like ingrained in the defensive, rules they play with all season?
Yeah, I know the general concept and plays that you're talking about. I don't remember the specifics of who should have been there, but it probably just was as simple as a break, like just a mental lapse, and maybe that goes back to fatigue and low energy, right? Where you're not as mentally into it either. Of you have rules defensively. Everybody has rules defensively, and Purdue, more than a lot of teams, have to live with those rules because they do not have the foot speed or athleticism to make up for it one-on-one. Some teams can just kind of get by just kind of going out there and playing defense. Purdue is not one of those teams. And so, yeah, I would guess in that scenario, Wilberg's probably doing what he's supposed to do.
Oh, 100%.
But then that means you got to trust your teammates to be able to do what they're supposed to do. And if that's not happening, then it's because then it can even go to are you question kind of the next time, like, okay, do I front as hard? And now things can break down that way. And I think it can quickly spiral.
Yeah. I was watching with a few friends, Kraig, and when Will got beat on that over the top pass and nobody's there to, protect underneath the basket, they're like, oh, Will, what is he doing there? I'm like, well, no, he's doing his job. That's how they defend this year. They don't have Edey. Like, I don't think Edey's playing it that way, right? They're going to have him between the basket and the player and the post player. But the way they do it now, because these, the bigs they have aren't as dominant of a defensive presence underneath the rim. So that's how they choose to play it. But you got to have the guy behind there. So they had a few breakdowns in that regard. What do you got, Kraig?
And we're getting beat on so many backdoor cuts too. It's like everybody's cheating in, getting ready to help if that pass comes in, and just eyes aren't there. And I mean, it happened multiple times tonight, and it happened in the last game a few times too, as well, even against USC. And I don't know. I didn't feel like the energy was bad tonight. I felt like attention to detail at times was bad, but I didn't necessarily feel like the energy itself was. I don't know. And to the closeout point, just like you said, Joe, I think guys are so worried about getting beat off the dribble on the perimeter. It feels like they're just closing out short. And I mean, at this point, right, if I'm a team that draws Purdue in the tournament, I'm running a little bit of action to get switched off CJ, basically. Just get me off CJ, get me on anybody else, and then I'm going to try to penetrate and get into the paint a little bit and then start kicking the ball around, and Purdue's going to be in trouble. And from that standpoint. Now, I do think
even CJ, Jakari, Colvin, it's not like they've been awesome either. Like, it's just
right.
No, I agree. You're still going to try to just get them switched off because why not? But
yeah. So unless you guys have anything else, I wanted to talk about the couple positives from this game and then use the rest of the show to either answer questions from the chat or look ahead to what we anticipate for the end of the Big Ten tournament, for what the seedings could potentially be for Purdue, and this road to trying to find their way to what can be defined as a successful season for Purdue. It hasn't been, it's had its lows, but there's certainly been some positives, and we'll try to focus on some of those to end the show to make people feel better as they're hanging out here at 12:52 in the morning, West Lafayette time. So we appreciate everybody. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, we appreciate you guys. But if you head over to the YouTube channel and hit the like on the show, certainly helps us out in that regard. But my couple positives I think are going to be pretty obvious. There's some people in the chat that have brought their names up. Tamaz says Miles has been a positive. He needs more shots. His shot is so pure. Miles had a bunch of really good moments in this game. I mean, anytime he has an open three, I'm excited for him to pull up and knock it down. Like he is shooting with confidence, and he's got a sweet stroke. The defensive play he made where he got in front of the guy and they called the foul on Miles, Well, I didn't agree with Painter, did not agree with it, whatever. If it was a foul, I know my buddy that keeps me honest now, he'll probably say it was clean or it was a foul, whatever. I don't care. I liked the effort for Miles there to get in front of the pass. It just shows how engaged he is on both ends of the court. And Miles here now, it's not just like a blip or a little spurt. This is a running trend now for weeks since he's come out of it, and it's a lot of fun to watch him play basketball right now.
This is the Colvin we were hoping to see more of to start the season. Like when people and me especially were predicting kind of in the small ball 5 with TK at the 5, and like you can get athletic with Colvin and Heidi. Like Colvin especially, you're starting to see this is what we were expecting to see more of. I just looked it up. 14 of 35 from 3 over the past month. That is 40%. Cameron Heidi in that span, also 9 of 14s, which is 64%. Also Lawyer, 19 of 38, which is 50%. I don't think that includes today, but also just kind of wild. But yeah, this has been the Colvin we've been wanting to see more and more of. And like, I agree. If there's the positive, it's, hey, Colvin is a guy that a month ago, I did not trust Colvin to play basketball really at all. And now it's like, oh yeah, no, keep giving him minutes, because he is a guy that at this moment they can rely on going into the tournament.
Yeah, and him and Cam both, and I talked about this during the game too. It's kind of switch. Jakari shot the ball well too. Knocks down another one. I think he's maybe 1 and 5 out of his last 5, so it doesn't look quite as good as it did, since January 1, because until the Big Ten tournament, right, he was like 40% in the month of January. So those 3 guys have got it going. CJ seems to maybe have hit a little bit of a freshman wall or something. That shot, there was a long time, every time he rose up, you're like, that's going in. And the shot just hasn't been there over the last couple of weeks. But, Miles and Cam, obviously super positives in the fact that they're just knocking some threes down again. And look, we have 2 All-Americans, right? So the plays are going to run through them, or TKR is in the running for an All-American. Braden definitely is. Painter's going to play through those 2 guys. And everybody else in terms of how they get involved is going to be those 2 guys making the right reads, whether that's TKR kicking it out when he gets doubled or when they send help, or if they're swarming Braden on top, right? If they're high hedging, if they're trapping him on top, he's got to get the ball out of his hands, because Painter said that in yesterday's game. The Painter's got to get the ball out of his hands and let other guys make plays. Today, that was TKR needed to get the ball out of his hand and let others make play. But we're going to play through those 2 guys. Like, that's how Purdue is going to play.
Yep. And you mentioned it there, Kraig. David Jenkins also says it here in the chat, says his positive, and it was mine as well. You mentioned it, Kraig. Jakari Harris, excellent coast to coast to drive and finish at the end of the game, stole the ball and dunked it. He had that dunk too, but the drive through traffic was aggressive and really good. Knocked down a 3, 4-4 from the free throw line. So that was a good sign. Like, you see a freshman, be able to do that. I did appreciate at the end of the game where it was Miles, CJ, and Jakari. The game was over. They're down by 15. There's 3 minutes left, and they didn't stop playing. Even the bench was encouraging them. I know these are little wins. We've come a long way from national championship game glory and Final Four appearances and things like that. And we're trying to pull our teeth to find a few positives, but I will give credit for that. I got a lot of respect for the way they finished that game, and I'm excited for their futures here in this program, but also their opportunity to make an impact here right now in a week in the tournament. And so you've got 3 guys here that are playing. If they could find a way to get CJ going again, then you got 4 guys along with the 2 All-Americans. You got the role players sprinkled around them. Cam Heidi as well, like you said, has been showing up here also lately. And so, there is a pathway here. There is a formula to success. They need the right matchup, right? You need the right matchups, when you get into the tournament. You need to play with the right energy. You need to be able to shoot well and things of that nature. But there's a few guys that are trending in the right direction, in that regard, that I think Purdue fans can try to find some positive from and try to find something to be excited about here in the next week. And I think this is a pretty interesting question, so I'll ask it here while we're talking about it. Tamaz says, speaking of small ball, have we tried that lineup recently at all, or is it just a defensive liability?
Yeah.
When you're talking about having Braden and then CJ Cox, Jakari Harris, Miles Colvin, Cam Heide, whatever, you get Trey Kaufman, pick a post player. But I do think that's interesting. I know they're not going to do it. I know the answer, but I do think it's interesting to suggest because let's get all the long athletic guys in there, right? Because there's times where they look small out there. So you get Miles and you get Cam and you get Jakari and CJ who are dogs defensively, and then stick them with Trey Kaufman, Ren, and try to be aggressive, and put some pressure on the other team. I understand why you can't because of the personnel of the players that they go to, but I think it's worth at least asking, and Tomas has.
They went to it for the last 4 minutes where it was Colvin at the 4. It was Braden, Jakari, CJ/Lawyer, Colvin, and TKR. I don't know if they'll do it in meaningful minutes. It might be more of a break glass in case of emergency type thing. I think the biggest concern with that lineup is rebounding. Colvin and CJ have been solid rebounding. TKR has his games where he's really good on the glass. Other games it's okay. That's the biggest concern from it, but it gets to a point, especially that's why I think you go to it today. It gets to a point where, all right, nothing else is working. Let's get dudes out there that are skilled and can go make plays and just see if something works.
Energy, right? CJ plays with energy. He'll play the entire length of the court defensively. Jakari too gets up in your business as soon as the ball's inbounded. Miles Colvin plays with energy and athleticism and length. Cam Heide, he's got the athleticism, so I don't know, that energy, to find some guys. If Painter's saying we have trouble at times getting our energy, then put the guys in there that play with energy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And
I've befuddled everyone. I don't know. Like you said, if nothing else working, then try that.
And yeah, I mean, I guess it was probably too late at that point that he did try it, but he did go to it probably too late. So
well, yeah, I mean, the game was over at that point, but I appreciate them showing the effort there at the end. I'm saying try that line. Hell, if they're going to try certain lineups that they showed in the first half of some games in the second half of the season where there's you know what I mean? There was certain points in the season where the lineups they had at the 12-minute mark of the first half, we were questioning. So I don't know, just throwing it against the wall. I thought it was an interesting question from Tomas.
Yeah.
The other question I have, Kraig, and I'm sorry if you have another. Go
ahead. Go right ahead.
My other question too is, where's Raleigh Burgess? Is he hurt?
He came in tonight, so there's been rumor. I haven't heard anything officially reported. Did he say anything in the press conference, Joe? No. There's been nothing officially reported. There's been rumors that he's been seen walking around with a boot on and whatnot. It seems like something he's nursing. He was icing it right away yesterday, even though he didn't play yesterday. And he's supposedly been seen wearing some type of a boot or something like that on one leg. So I don't know if they're trying to nurse him through something towards the end of the season and then have some of the offseason to recover or what exactly. But he did check in tonight, right, Joe, at the end of the game?
Yeah, right towards the end. I honestly think it's just a matchup thing. I don't know how much more Burgess is giving you in this matchup than Berg, and Berg is at least giving you 7'2", and that I think at this point this very, very seconds, with those two playing, I don't know what the too much difference is in terms of production. So I think when you're going up against Golden, who's a top 2-3 big in the conference, I think they just wanted to go for more size. And even a Visic a couple games ago and things like that. I think that would be my guess. I don't know for sure, but that would be my guess.
Yep. Moving things along here on the Boilers in the Stands post-game show, late night, but you'll have a few days to watch this post-game show, and then there's a strong likelihood that we'll go live on Sunday evening when the brackets come out. We have done live reaction shows for the bracket reveals in the last few years. Maybe instead of doing the live reaction, maybe we'll just wait till the bracket's set and then come on and then talk about the journey. I'll let Kraig and Joe figure that out because we all know this is their show, and I am a passenger on this fine program that they've built into a really respectable thing that I know all of you guys enjoy. But certainly excited to see what the journey for Purdue will be. So that kind of moves us to the final segment of the show here. You know, guys, I know we talked about the different scenarios of how they can move up to the 3 seed, how they could fall to as far as the 7 seed. And so, Kraig, I'll start with you. Where do you think they're going to be seated? And am I going to be happy next week, or am I going to be crying?
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to understand, I sat with Tonsoni quite a bit today. So I, A, talked to him, and B, got to just kind of overhear as they were working through seed line stuff, as they were watching the Big Ten tournament. But I think, first of all, what you got to realize is seeds 1 through 5 are done. Like, they did those. They were set after yesterday. So coming into today, seeds 1 through 5 on all across the entire bracket, the committee already has done. Now, can some of those change? Potentially, yeah. They certainly can. You know, if somebody gets further, wins a conference tournament championship, maybe they have a contingency of, if this happens, we're going to go with this bracket versus that bracket sort of thing. But by and large, those first 5 seeds are set, right? So I'm pretty like 98% sure that if most of the bracketologists that I trust have it right, that Purdue's a 4 seed, and there's no way that they're moving to a 5, and there's no way that they're moving to a 3. Losing against Michigan is not a bad,
and certainly not a 6, which is what some people. Okay.
No. We had no chance of being a 6 or a 7. I don't know where that's coming from, but you know, if Purdue made it all the way to the conference championship, won the conference championship, maybe there's a chance they bump up to a 3 with Iowa State losing the other day. But where it sits right now, this isn't a bad loss. None of the other teams right now at this point in the conferences that matter, that have teams with seedings that are around us, have a chance to get bad losses either. It's just, I don't want to say it's set in stone, but like, if the bracketologists I trust have us around, that all have us around a 4 seed, have it right now, I think Purdue's set as a 4. And I would expect that Purdue plays out on the East Coast or the West Coast. I don't think it's going to be Midwest anywhere.
Well, Jeff Nestor, bracketologist here in the chat, says absolutely no way a 4. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. Joe,
some were saying like a 6 or a 7 in the chat, and like, that's insane. Like, I guess I shouldn't say insane, because the people that do make the brackets have shown to be a bit wild at times, but yeah, 4 at worst 5.
Yeah.
And if you're a 5, you're probably in a good location, at least second weekends, which
Z Paulson in the chat says Jeff isn't a bracketologist. I know, I was just joking. It's just Jeff's opinion. It's okay. I appreciate Jeff, and I appreciate Paulson. We're gonna find out here on Sunday. Tarek says 5 seed is what we'll get. So yes, and Jeff saying, hey, they've lost 6 of their last 9. So, you know, it is interesting.
They don't look at that. It's we had friggin' Tonsoni on the show, who does this. They won the bracket challenge, which means they got the most seeds correct over the course of one of the seasons. They won that challenge. And he reiterates over and over and over again, it's a body of work. They're not looking at trends necessarily at any one given point in time.
But you can understand from a fan's perspective how that's surprising. Because, like, honestly, even for me, that's surprising. Because if you're a 4 seed, you know, there's 4 seeds for each line, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means
16.
If I'm doing my math, that they're now being defined as a top 16 team in the country. And their AP ranking before the tournament started was what, 20? And they barely beat USC, and then they got waxed by Michigan. And they do not look like a top 20 team in the country right now. They just don't. So, like, to have them ranked as a 4 seed means that they're defined as a top 16 team in the country. They just don't look that right now.
Do you know what's not included in any of the things that anybody in the committee looks at when they're doing seeding, Greg?
Nope.
AP rankings. Nobody gives a fat rat's ass about AP rankings when it comes to seedings.
I didn't even know they were 20th, to be honest.
Right. Well, I look at it, and a lot of fans look at it. I mean, a couple years ago, they had never been number one in the country ever. And I remember when they beat Iowa for the first time ever, Purdue is number one in the country. Travion Williams telling the paint crew, like, what up? You know, and it was a special moment at Mackey. Like,
yeah.
So, and
I look at it. I look at it, Greg, for fun. Joe does not. He's too analytical. I look at it for fun, and I put it out every single week where Purdue gets ranked. I'm saying the committee doesn't care about AP ranking whatsoever. Yeah. It's not even something looked at or considered.
Right. I get it. So it's Ken Pom. It's offensive and defensive ranking, right? That's like some of the stuff they're looking at, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ken Pom incorporates that. Yeah, Ken Pom, Torvik, net, wins above bubble. I assume they glance at the quad system.
How many quad 1 wins you have? Who was the team I saw that was like 0-18 in quad
Iowa.
1? Iowa. That's what you guys said, right?
Yeah.
And Fran McCaffrey was is that official that Fran McCaffrey's been fired by Iowa? So his final game he gets thrown out. So that's pretty apropos.
Thrown out and lets up like 110 points, just like the most Fran way to go out.
Quintessential Fran McCaffrey way to go out. He had a pretty good career there at Iowa, but he goes out on he did it his way moment as he gets thrown out of the Big Ten tournament. So interesting to see where Iowa goes from there. So I don't know, wherever else you guys want to take this. I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on tomorrow's Big Ten tournament matchups or who you think is going to win the Big Ten tournament. The floor is yours for however you want to finish this show.
That was one of the starred comments, actually. So let's go ahead and pull that one up. Kurt Maines says, who wins the conference tourney? Joe and I already did this earlier. So Greg, we'll let you pick first.
Okay. That's interesting. Maryland is going to win the Big Ten tournament.
That's who Kraig has. I'll switch right now to Michigan.
You're switching.
Just to be contrarian. Like, my biggest concern was that Michigan State wouldn't care, and I just that's a miss on my part. Like, Tom Izzo does care about dominating every single basketball game. So, also, I'm just kind of buying in on them. I think it's probably Michigan State versus Maryland. My preseason pick or pre-tourney pick was Maryland. I'll throw out Michigan State just to be contrarian, though.
Well, I didn't know what either of you picked.
Yeah, no.
And obviously, I'm basing this off of the wax job they gave Illinois tonight, and they've looked good for a while now too. So Maryland will certainly be interesting. Overall, how do you guys think the Big Ten will fare in March Madness?
They're going to play games. They will do that.
They're going to play games
in the tournaments. Probably 8 of them, maybe 9 if IU can sneak in. Where my general thought is like I would expect them to have a solid output. Like probably a few teams make the second weekend.
How many teams make it to the second weekend?
3 is the number I've kind of come across. The issue is like I don't know who it's going to be. It could be Michigan State makes a Final Four run. It could also be Michigan State gets bounced round 2, and it's Wisconsin and Maryland and Oregon that go on these runs, or like really like out of the top 8. Sure, I'll list them: Michigan State, Maryland, Michigan, Wisconsin, Oregon, Purdue, Illinois, and UCLA. I think those are all the 8 I'm talking about. I don't think for any of them it would shock me too much if they lost in the first round or like made the Elite 8s.
Yeah, and I feel really, really comfortable with Maryland, Michigan State, and Wisconsin. I see all 3 of those in the second weekend, and then I think a 4th one gets in. Of the other remaining 5 teams, that somebody gets a good draw or just good matchups or whatever. But I'm comfortable with them. And I think sometimes we get lost in the silo so much of like watching these Big Ten games and being like, oh, the Big Ten's just not that good or whatever. The SEC is really good this year. The ACC is terrible. other than Duke, right? They've got one shot. The Big East is not good this year. Like the Big 12 is in a down year. Like the Big 10 is still the second best conference in the country this year. You could argue Big 12 or Big 12. I'm not going to cut hairs on that or whatever. But so when we look at the tournament, it's like, well, yeah, like don't necessarily trust many of these teams to go real far. But at the same time, I'm looking at it like, well, outside of the SEC and a couple, like one team from this conference, one team from that conference, who the hell do I trust? So I actually have a decent amount of faith that the Big Ten's going to have a nice showing. And I think they definitely, I am sold that the Big Ten has at least one team in the big Final Four at the end of this season.
Well, and how many of those teams can avoid a 1 seed in the second round? Because I think all of these teams in the Big Ten are going to have trouble with the 1 seeds.
Yeah, that's where the Big Ten's good, is that right? And you compare them to the Big 12. The Big Ten, they do not have that top tier talent. They do not have a Houston. They do not have a Texas Tech. Maybe you could argue Michigan State's close to Texas Tech, but they have a bunch of teams that are like in that 3 to the 6, right? Big Ten's going to have 8 teams. If they have IU's just the outlier. They're going to be last 4, and we're just going to ignore them, which I know Purdue fans won't have an issue doing. For this talk specifically, all 8 of those teams are going to be 6 seeds or better. Like the talent is there. It's just everybody aside from Michigan State's going to be like a 4, 5, or 6. So there's going to be some 4 seeds that will get the Duke and the Auburn and the Houston that if without looking at a bracket, I think I would have all 3 of those teams in my Final Four. So like it's going to be tough to get past them, but there is enough top talent of that 3 to 6 range. Plus Michigan State's going to be a good 2 seed that like somebody should make a run.
Yeah. Yep. So, all right. Well, we'll have more of a preview to March Madness on Sunday and even throughout next week. However, and Kraig and Joe want to shake that out as we approach the March Madness bracket reveal. And then, of course, everything that leads up to our coverage here next week. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Once again, please hit that like button. Yes, Joe, go ahead.
I was going to segue with that. Just a thanks to everybody because of your guys' support. Braggs, I know that Kraig and I have kind of taken over in terms of the day-to-day at this point, but like you also helped build this and you brought me on and brought Kraig on, and I've gotten to go watch 7 or whatever Big Ten basketball games in person today because of that. And I'm going to go watch 2 more tomorrow. And I'm going to go watch the championship Sunday. So, and being credentialed, and I've been able to meet some really cool people and talk to people and stuff like that. So just wanted, one of those moments, and I'm sure I'll do the same after whenever Purdue does end their run. Just a quick thanks to everybody. Thanks to both of you for, bringing me along a couple years ago and allowing me to be able to do stuff like this, allowing me to ask Painter post-game questions, and he gave me what felt like a 5-minute answer. I don't know the exact time, but gave me another very legit answer.
He gives me a run for my money on how long he can either ask a question or answer a question.
You two could do a podcast, just you two, and it could go an hour, and there could be legitimately maybe 3 actual questions asked.
Yeah,
100%
for sure. Are we going to run through these start comments, Greg?
Yeah, we are.
Right.
Andrew Mackey agrees with me, so I'm going to pull up his comment. He says, 100% agree with you, Braggs. Why they can't stop anybody anyway, mix the lineups and bring in high energy guys with length to create havoc defensively. Payton can be too inflexible in his approach. I get where you're coming from. I think when it feels like there's just nothing happening, just shake it up, even if it's for a couple minutes. But I also understand the other side of that coin, and you got to go with the horses that got you here. You got to trust, and you can't panic, and let these guys find their way back to getting into a rhythm. And the team that played so well for a month and a half stretch, from January 1st on. Tamaz says, any news on the Fletcher injury? He obviously took a hard spill, underneath the hoop, knocked his elbow. People thought maybe he had like a dislocated elbow the way his arm looked. But honestly, the way I saw it on the TV broadcast, if you watch before he falls, his elbow just looks like that. I don't think anybody had really like paid attention to the way his elbow
You
looks.
aren't analyzing Fletcher Lawyer's elbow just in your free
Not
time?
really until I thought his elbow was broken. And then when he's crashing to the floor, before he even hits the floor, you can kind of see like the way his bone structure is. Like it like looks like it's just how his elbow looks, in my opinion. I know he took a hard spill. I don't know. Was there any update from Painter on his status after he came back into the game, obviously?
Yeah, basically the only comment really on that was just that Painter said trainer said he was good to go. Painter obviously did not want to put Fletcher back in if he was going to re-injure it. Trainer said, yeah, there's not really like a chance that could happen with what the injury was, which obviously Painter did not give one way or another of what the actual injury was, but that makes me believe at least that it wasn't like a dislocation or anything like that where there is that concern. And Kraig, you said whatever it could potentially be, the whatever popping or
Bobby said it looked like a bursa sac injury, which is a small sac surrounding that elbow there that kind of contains fluid. So do you want me to go into detail, Kraig? Or
No.
It's not a medical show. We won't worry about it.
No.
I'll probably get something wrong too. And somebody's probably in here that's like a nurse or something that's like, Kraig has no idea what he's talking about. So let's just move to the next one.
Yeah. Well, he came back into the game, so he'll be fine. No,
Yep.
I'm kidding. Hopefully he'll be fine. We're rooting for that. They certainly need him here next week. Scott White, who had a few comments early in the show, and then he signed off early on, said, gonna miss my first Boilers in the Stands of the year. Good night, all. Boiler up. We appreciate you as always, Scott. Tamaz, looking ahead, says, do you think we can get a big rim protector in the offseason?
I mean, they got one already.
Yeah, yes, that's where I was gonna go, Joey. Like, I am 100% sure that we get a big rim protector this offseason because we already have one. He's just hurt.
Right.
Outside of that, Joe and I were talking about this earlier too. When you look at the transfer portal, if you look at it last year, if you look at it the year before, high quality centers are the hardest thing to come by in that transfer portal, and they generally cost. To get the really good ones. They
Bad
cost.
bigs are expensive.
What did do you remember what what Cliff got when he went to Alabama?
I could try to look it up really quick. I know it's a lot.
Yeah,
I will just say I know that there were backup mid-major bigs making roughly a couple $100,000.
Yeah. So I think there's a chance. I think there might be a better chance of getting somebody that's labeled a power forward that's like 6'10" or something that can help provide some rim protection versus a true like 7-foot center to back up Jacobson or something like that. But there's a chance. It's just there's a limited number of them, more so than any other positions that you would try to go after, and you got to be willing to put the resources there to get it.
Well, and it's a shame too, because you got 1 year of Raleigh Burgess to develop, while playing, and next year's a big year. And so you got Daniel Jacobson coming in, and he certainly has a skill set and a talent, and he's got the size, but he didn't get that experience, that game experience. So he's going to have his natural developmental curve of his own next year, playing games for the first time. And it's a big year next year. It's Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and Trey Kaufman-Wren's senior year. The Final Four is in Indianapolis. So I am, to answer your question, just not as dialed into the roster and the construction. I know, Joe, you really get into this part, and Kraig, you too, with, who's coming in next and who's leaving potentially, and, how they're, Painter wants to see his vision. But I do hope they go all in, whatever it takes. You got to bring in a big-time big, bring in a David Jenkins type. I want them to push their chips all in 1 year and do right by this senior class next year and go for it again. It could be another special year next year with those three guys as seniors, this freshman class rolling over into sophomores and a little more developed. Miles Colvin and Cam Heide finishing the season strong. Add a couple guys that are going to put you over the top and give yourself a chance to make a run in the tournament next year that could end in Indianapolis and have a really special story for Braden Smith and all those guys, Trey Kaufman-Wren, to finish their senior years. And I think that is fully attainable. That those goals are still in sight next year. They can get to a Final Four next year. but everybody's got to get a little better. And I do think they got to try to upgrade this roster a little bit. And so I hope that Purdue and Painter are aggressive in that regard. Few more comments here to end the show. Blaine J says, I noticed subtle parroting of whatever Painter says shows a lot of respect, but need to dig a bit deeper. We got the open looks, quote unquote. So let's be consistent. Says every losing team in history. I don't know who highlighted this, but whoever did obviously has thoughts to it.
I did. and I guess I did it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think we certainly talk about things beyond what Painter talks about, but we do go to the press conferences. I would also say I think Painter is one of the most honest coaches in the entire country in terms of being open about specifically what the team did poorly and admitting like what the holes are in a team. Whereas some, like if you look at the answer to Joe the other day, like he breaks that down very specifically about what their assignments are and what they're not doing well in that type of situation. Also, like he's right. Like on this one, they got open looks all night. They got what they wanted.
Fall.
Yeah, it just didn't go in. And like Lawyer got some open looks. Smith got open looks. Whatever. Like they just didn't go in. That ones that normally do. So in this specific case, I just believe Painter was 100% right talking about that from the open look side of things. Now,
go ahead.
I was going to say for those that are like chiming in and saying we've got to get everybody else involved more. I do agree with you on that. Like to jump off of this, I just think that Smith and TK are making the right decision, right? Depending on what the defense is to get those guys the ball and let them have a chance to take their shot when they're open or when they should be expected to be open.
Yeah,
like
and
also
in
this game specifically, like I'm pulling up the exact stats again. Purdue has 5 turnovers total, right? And we did mention TKR probably could have made a couple more passes and got it out of the post. So yes, there was that, but like it wasn't like Braden was forcing. It wasn't like all these guys, like it wasn't like Lawyer was kind of going rogue with some of his drives or guys weren't making plays that they normally do. There was just a whole lot of wow. Braden missed a 10-foot jumper he always makes. Oh wow, TKR missed that 8-foot hook shot that feels like it goes in 80% of the time, and they just happened all at once. I think if somebody's going to nitpick something like that, you nitpick that, not that Painter's like, hey, we got the open looks, because like you said, he's 1000% right on that. It's that Purdue doesn't necessarily have a way to combat, like if the open looks don't go in. I don't know, aside from maybe the Oregon game earlier this year, there hasn't really been a game where it's like, oh, well, they can just do this and they're going to be fine. Like that's the issue to me.
And that piggybacks to this starred comment from Kurt.
Well, before you move on from it, I just want to I want to get in on this for a second too, because I do, because the parroting part, it really strikes a chord with me. You're gonna hear a lot of parroting of things Painter says on this show because we listen to him, because he's a damn good coach, and so I'm a Painter disciple. Full disclosure, super biased for Matt Painter because I believe he's one of the best coaches in the country. And there are things he's taught me about the game, and I've loved the game of basketball. I'm almost 40 years old, my entire life, and there's things in the last 6 years I've learned so much from listening to him and how much he teaches the game. Listening to Joe and Kraig has also been very insightful for me to understand the game at a level that I never really did. And I've played the game growing up. I've watched every dribble since I was a kid. I watched, the whole 90s Michael Jordan era of basketball, which was the golden era of basketball and will always be the golden era. But I still appreciate the game for what it is today. And I will always love Big Ten basketball. And Painter is a master at coaching. And so there is going to be things you hear that is parroted on this show of Painterisms, if you will. I also am friends with someone that's an assistant coach on the staff. So I'll admit all those biases, but then I also want you to understand, Blaine, that doesn't mean that I don't challenge some of the things Painter has done. There's times we've had Painter on this show where I have questioned him on certain things to hear his perspective. I don't agree with everything he does. I watched him, in games where they lost to 16 seeds or St. Peter's, where I wish they would have called timeouts in certain situations to try to stop the bleeding. There's times where I think Painter, kind of lets it all play out, and I wish he'd put a halt to things. There's times where I wish he'd go at the refs a little harder, and I've told Painter that on our show to his face, and he thinks I'm a meatball because I think he should yell at the refs more, and that's fine. So I'm never really going to go too deep into challenging him on the X's and O's. Do I think that maybe they could have figured out how to get the other three guys moving off the ball a little better tonight? And you got three guys standing around while two guys are playing a two-man game up the middle. Yeah, sure. I absolutely thought that. Joe's the X's and O's guy here. Kraig certainly understands the game at a high level. But I'm going to stick in my lane in certain ways, but I also will take exception to anyone that thinks that we don't have the balls to challenge what we're seeing just because we love this program or we love this coach. So that's my little rant in that regard. We do keep it balanced. We do keep it professional. We are a Boilers fan show who are also analysts, so we root for this program. Kraig and Joe went to this school, so there's internal biases within all of this, so we can acknowledge all that stuff. But I'm also the same guy that told that I went on a rant after the IU game that they should all walk home from Bloomington, and that included my good friend that's on the assistant coaching staff. So not afraid to say whatever we need to say on this show, but it will be said in a respectful manner. But yes, you are going to hear some Painterisms come out of our mouth because we listen to what he says, and we've been covering him for a long time here. And that's the end of my rant. Go ahead with whatever the next comment was.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it kind of piggybacks into this, but Kurt said I'm a little concerned even if we had a stud bench, would they have the green light or not if we play feed the post because the scoring percentage is higher? It might not matter other than D. And we've talked about this a couple of different times, but sometimes I think it's funny because they'll be like, the bench just isn't doing enough. The bench just isn't doing enough. Well, look at usage rate. Look at Braden's usage rate. Look at TKR's usage rate. They're specifically trying to run everything through their two All-Americans. And when those guys are open because they collapse down on TKR and he kicks it out or whatever, you got to be ready to capitalize in those moments. So I took Kurt's point a little bit. I think there's some merit to that of this whole push at the bench can't do this, the bench can't do this is a little bit because we're focusing so much on the other two. But when they get that chance, they have to be able to do it. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Joe, as well.
Bench at 23 points today, if we care about that. I understand probably 4 something of those came in garbage time, but the bench did have 23 points. I also this might be me just very much nitpicking wording and maybe not exactly what Kurt meant, but I would very much push back on the green lights part of that. Painter has gotten on dudes for not shooting the ball. He has said that for years. He has said if you are passing up a good shot, you are doing a disservice to your team. He does not care who that is, if it is Colvin, if it is Heidi, if it is CJ. He has said that many times that it is literally detrimental to your team because your team works so hard and his system works so hard to get those open looks. If you are passing up on those, he's going to get on you. He got on it for Heidi yesterday. And Heidi, credit today, we didn't. It's a very, very, very small moment if we're looking at another positive. His second play that he was in, or very early on that he was in, he took a slightly contested 3 and drilled it. We have not seen Heidi do that early in the game, especially all year or since game 5. So that, again, I maybe am nitpicking wording and that's not quite what you meant, but they do have the green light to take those shots. And Painter gets on them if they don't.
Well, he's analytical. I mean, he talks about winning the possession battle. You want to have more possessions than the other team. You want to get more shots up than the other team because the more shots you get up, the more points analytically you're going to make just by the law of averages. And the more possessions you have, the more shots you're going to take, the more baskets you're going to make, the more games you're going to win. That's the simple math that he tries to create. But obviously the other team has plans too. And so that's just how it is. And so, but overall, that's kind of where we're at. I know we're going a little over here, so go ahead. I don't know if you guys got anything else.
Corey says Painter can say that, but it's very obvious that some of these guys are scared to death to shoot. Something is coming from the coaching staff that's causing this. And I couldn't disagree more. Painter has consistently gotten on guys for not shooting the ball. Right. I think that comes more from Heidi and Colvin not being able to hit a jumper. It felt like for a month and a half. And right when you get on that cold streak, then you are second guessing yourself. And we've already mentioned Heidi and Colvin are both shooting their ways out of it. Like, I don't think that's a Painter thing, telling him to not shoot the ball.
Well, Painter is paid to win games. Now these players are paid to win games. And if you have a guy on the court that has potential, but isn't reaching his potential, there's a shelf life for how many minutes Painter can realistically give him to find himself. We've gone through this with players in the past. Everyone was waiting for Brandon Newman to break out. I've watched Brandon Newman throughout high school, and then as he came here to Purdue, had high expectations for how he would do here. It didn't work out. But so many people thought the answer was just play him more, because there was a point where all of a sudden he started to take off. And they're like, see, if you just let him go through the struggles, then he'd find his way to become the good player that we all believe he can be. But that's easy to say when you're the guy at home versus the guy that has to coach this team and accept, okay, then I'm going to take X amount of losses for this guy who's a role player to find his way to try to become a star player when I already have star players on my team. So you look at a guy like Miles Colvin, who's all of a sudden woke up here in the last 3 weeks and become the player we've all hoped and expected he could be. You're saying, some people would say, well, just do that earlier in the year. Well, you're trying to win games. You're trying to win games, guys. And so you have to, it's a feel thing, and you've got to be able to put in guys that you can trust, that you know are going to get the job done, so you can get the wins in the column so you can try to get to the tournament. And so Miles found his way, and once he earns his trust, the minutes go up and the opportunity goes up. And now that can lead into next year. We'll have an even bigger role. But that's the beauty of Matt Painter. He makes you earn it. And once you've earned it, then you become that guy. If you don't earn it, then you'll lose it. And it's to me, it's the beauty of the program, because you can even be a great player like Travion Williams, but if Zach Edey's coming behind you and working you at practice because he's just downright a better player than you, he doesn't play the politics or the favorites. Zach Edey's going to be starting. Why? Because he's better. And people didn't understand it. And then the guy went on to win 2-time National Player of the Year. So Painter, I think, has a better sense of who actually has that ability and that trust to find their way through the mistakes and are worth it, versus the other guys that you got to take your time with and still try to find your way through wins. You're in a regular season. These aren't exhibition games.
Yeah. And just real quick, and then we can move on to the next one. I was a person who was very much like, man, I wish Painter would let this guy work through this. Like, let him work through this, because it's going to pay off in March. And like, kind of forgot, like, they're practicing, like they're getting to see them grow and how they're growing in practice, going against the starters and all of that. And really, when I kind of started going to some of the summer workouts and whatnot, like in my head of what I thought, like, oh, like this guy might be able to do this. And then went to summer workout, like, oh, no, like, no, this guy, because then you're going 5-on-5, right? With your first team and kind of your bench, or they'll mix it up or whatever. And then see that guy do some of the things that I'm like, man, if he got some work doing this in real time in game, maybe he could handle the ball a little bit better, and then maybe he could attack the rim. And then you see it, right? It's like observing summer workout, and you're like, no, like, nope, like they're right, they're 100% right.
Well, I think the one example of this that's the full extreme that we've seen here at Purdue is Carson Edwards. The year they go on the Elite Eight run and almost make it to a Final Four, he had major struggles at points throughout that season. They did not know how to figure out how he was going to run the offense, how he was going to execute it through Painter, but that was the roster they had, so they let him go through the ebbs and flows of the great moments and then the mistakes, and there were just times he'd go rogue and do his thing. Well, then all of a sudden he found it, figured out what he's trying to do, and he caught fire, and Painter was like, go for it, bud. Like, salute to you. And so that's an example there. But like, how many guys are going to find themselves through a season like Carson Edwards did that year to have this Renaissance March Madness? That's few and far between. That's a tough thing to just say, I'm going to blindly trust and find my way through a season of struggles and then expect them to have a Carson Edwards March Madness.
Right. Well, he didn't have anybody else that year. Like
Correct.
it was going to go through Carson. And B, Carson was an All-American the year before also. So like he had a really good year, but nonetheless, he had struggles that year. Let him work through it. But most other years, Painter has other options. Moving on. Emmy Bogenwright says, we are all frustrated, but as a fan base, we have to be better. I started for that specific reason, not for the second half of that. Emmy, thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Longtime listener. I know you're always tuning in. I just wanted to put this here because when I was walking out, and I know, Greg, you specifically, sometimes I maybe get on a high horse a little bit too much, and maybe I shouldn't, and whatever. And I know you really don't like to say anything about how you should be a fan this way or be a fan this way or whatever, but I'm walking out today and like I hear somebody behind me say, well, the good news is Purdue fans, we just expect to be disappointed because we never actually win anything. And I was like in my head immediately, I was like, who in the Big Ten is trading the last 5 years for Purdue's?
Right.
Everybody.
Who in the Big Ten is trading like Braden Smith for their point? Or like would you know what I'm saying? Like who wouldn't trade for Braden Smith as their point guard or TKR as their power forward or Matt Painter is their coach? Other than like Michigan
There's
State
a couple
with
for
Tom Izzo. But like, give me a break, dude. Like, because we didn't win the national championship last year, like this team, it is the most winning program in the Big Ten in the last 5 years? I think they announced the other day.
It's the winningest team in
over a 5 year period
in the history of the Big Ten.
And like 2 Big Ten conference championships the last 2 years, Big Ten tournament champion the year before. Like
that includes this year. So
right, like
people are saying is a disappointing, and it has had its disappointments, but this 5 year period of the winningest 5 year period in the history of the Big Ten of any team ever,
right,
that includes this year.
And then I'm scrolling through Twitter, which I probably shouldn't have done on the way home a little bit, right? And like I see some tweets that are like, anybody other than X, Y, and Z, feel free to hit the portal. Like what? No. That's not the way to be, man.
I will say, like, you know, as I cover the Big Ten, and obviously I am more in Purdue Twitter than others, but I would say in general, you can look at most fan bases. One, large chunks of most fan bases, very good people, very fun fans. Like,
yes,
we as humans, we focus on the negative. It's just how we're wired, and that's a small percentage. So get that out of the way. But I do think the biggest, right? Every fan base I think has like a little bit of a gripe, you could say, of, you know, pretentious or just different things like that. I would say Purdue's is whining. Like we whined like no other. And I'm not saying don't be frustrated. I am not saying don't, you know, like that's part of being the fan is being frustrated and having the emotional attachment. And that's what makes sports so awesome. But at the same time, like, we whine so much. Like there is a reason that the fan base has this reputation, at least in social media circles. And I know that's a fraction of the fan base also, but like there's a reason that this fan base has that. And as somebody that can step a little bit outside with covering the rest of the Big Ten, like I would tend to agree that is probably the biggest gripe with this fan base.
I also say, while we're on our high horse here, that I think that also plays into the fact that I believe, you know, Purdue fans are really dialed into a lot of the details more than maybe some other fan bases. And maybe I'm wrong in that regard, but Purdue fans, for the most part, really know their stuff. They follow every game. They understand the situational stuff. They understand the personnel at a deeper level. And so then the criticisms really can cut deep to the core of certain things. And that's passion. You know, that's a passionate fan base. And that's the community we've built here. We have a passionate fan base, and there's people that'll air it out in the chat. And as long as they're respectful to that line, they're allowed to say whatever they want in here too. But like I said, to that line, and you're welcome to vent your frustrations and call things out. We'll put certain comments up, and if there's others, we might not. Like that's just how I operate personally. Happy to have you guys, you know, voice your opinion. And we've had debates with people from the chat that feel strongly opposite of how we feel. So I'll never curtail how a person feels, but I think our fan base that watches this show has always done a good job of keeping that line of respect and love. We all have the same love for the program. And so ultimately, when people air the clip on Twitter or wherever you want to talk about social media, Facebook, it is human nature. And I think it's more, when you talk about the whining or whatever, it's more of a projection because we all want it so bad. And I've gone through this as a Cubs fan. I talked about it a million times. Chicago fans can be very negative. Bears fans are going through it right now. And when you get to its core, it's just because we all want that championship. So I always try to look through that and understand the real true feelings behind the words. A lot of people want to talk tough, but really it's just from a place of love. So anybody that's in our chat, as long as you keep it respectful, you can always say and vent your frustrations. That's what we're here for. Nights like this are therapy in a lot of ways, not just like a informational thing. It's just for us to kind of, get our thoughts out to make us feel better as we move on to the weekend. And we are already in the weekend because it is approaching 2 a.m. Eastern time as Kraig might fall asleep right here on his microphone here in a minute.
I'm old. I'm an old man, Greg. You got to remember that.
I understand.
I'm like 20 years older than Joe.
I'm looking forward to sleeping in for sure. Z Paulson says, chilling in CP right now, Bregs. Love it. Region Rat. Z Paulson, he's been in the chat all night. Appreciate you. And David Jenkins, I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on this. Showed on the broadcast during one of the timeouts. Smith was coaching up. I'm not going to really say he was laying into everyone. It seemed like just the way he was motioning was where he was kind of emphasizing how everyone needs to get back on defense. That's how I interpreted what he was trying to say to the team, just from the mannerisms and hand gestures he was making. But he kind of took over the huddle. PJ was sitting in the chair, Painter was standing behind him, and Braden was kind of leading the timeout, moment, and was almost like coaching them at one point. So Braden was showing a little bit of leadership there.
Yeah, obviously I did not see it, but I only take that as positives. Like Purdue needs a guy like that, and Braden, this is Braden's team at the end of the day. It is. And so he's got to be the guy that can do that. I think Edey could do it a little bit differently, just with his dynamic, and truly like nobody was going to outwork Edey and literally probably the country every single night. And so you could get away with maybe not being quite as vocal, but Edey would lay into guys too. And then again, I don't know the specifics, but I would generally take that as a positive because Purdue needs it.
All right. Late show, long show, but the end of the Big Ten tournament for the Purdue Boilermakers as they fall to Michigan. As Michigan wins handedly, they'll take on Maryland tomorrow, along with Wisconsin and Michigan State facing off in the Final Four of the Big Ten tournament. So that wraps things up for tonight. Once again, hit that like button. If you're still here this late, and if you've watched this show all the way to the very end, that means you enjoy what you're seeing. So please show your support by hitting that like button, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about us. We'll be back. Well, like I said, more than likely this Sunday evening, once the brackets get revealed, and we'll do a reaction to that and see what the roadmap looks like for our Purdue Boilermakers and the rest of the Big Ten. So for Kraig Bowers and Joe Jackson, thank you guys for all your coverage here at the Big Ten tournament. Enjoy the rest of it for however you're going to watch it, and appreciate your coverage as always. Once again, thank you to everyone in the chat. Have a good weekend. Have a good night. Keep your heads up, and also boiler up.